So Seth, Richie, Jacob, Scott, and Kate, they make it across the Mexico border. They meet Carlos at the rendezvous. Carlos double crosses Seth and Richie and decides he wants 100% instead of the original 30%, which they agreed upon. So this pisses off Richie and he attacks Carlos. Carlos and his goons then abduct Richie, Scott, and Kate, and all the while keeping Jacob and Seth at bay. He then informs them that if they want to see their loved ones again, they're going to have to come up with double the amount and then meet them at El Rey to make the exchange. Seth suggests robbing a bank to get the additional monies needed to pay for the ransom, but Jacob refuses. Meanwhile, Richie, Scott, and Kate are being held in the basement at Carlos's compound. Richie makes advances on Kate. Scott tries to defend Kate's honor, and Richie kills Scott accidentally. Kate gets revenge for Scott's death by seducing Richie and then cutting his balls off and watching him bleed to death. Carlos discovers the two dead hostages along with the blood-soaked Kate, and commands her to get cleaned up and join him for dinner. Now, Jacob turns to God in prayer and has a vision of his wife, Jenny, played by Salma Hayek. This encounter is the spiritual awakening that restores his faith and gives him the courage he needs to break into the compound and save his kids. Jacob teams up with Seth, and they arm themselves with machine guns, flamethrowers, rocket launchers, and all kinds of explosive weaponry. Just as Carlos starts to make his advances on Kate, Seth and Jacob burst into the compound and start killing everyone in sight. There's a major battle. All of Carlos's goons are shot, stabbed, lit on fire, decapitated, and blown to bits, until only Carlos remains. We then have a three-way Mexican standoff between Seth, Jacob, and Carlos. Just as Carlos is about to pull the trigger and kill Seth, Jacob makes the ultimate sacrifice, throwing his body in front of the bullet, saving Seth's life, giving him the amount of time he needs to kill Carlos. Seth then promises Jacob he'll take care of Kate, and Jacob dies in his arms. Seth then finds the money, he finds Kate, they hop into one of Carlos's sports cars, and they drive away, running over all the dead bodies in their wake. A new day dawns, and they drive off into the sunrise.
Okay, so all that's great. But what if, instead, once they get to the rendezvous point, it turns out to be a den of bloodthirsty vampires?
No, that'll never work.
Welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Jonny Craddock.
And today we will be continuing our NostalgiaCast 90s Palooza by taking a look at From Dusk Till Dawn from 1996, directed by Robert Rodriguez, written by Quentin Tarantino, starring George Clooney in his first big mainstream movie role, Harvey Keitel, Juliette Lewis, Cheech Marin in a few parts. Obviously, Salma Hayek shows up in there. We'll be chatting with my Twitter friend, Lindsay Washburn. She's a great YouTuber, actress, advocate, podcaster. She wears many, many hats. She's very, very smart, very funny. So we'll be chatting with her about that. She's also what I would call a horror movie maven, where she loves talking about horror, loves talking about VHS and all, like the, not gore porn, what was it back then? Like the video nasties and things like that. Like she really has a history with those. And so it's going to be fun chatting with her about that. But before we do that, let's go ahead and talk about Fight Club. We had your friend on, and now my friend, like our mutual friend, Tim Haid on. How did he come down on the movie? How did you come down on the movie? Do we have a new appreciation for Fight Club than we had before our conversation?
I mean, yeah, I think so. I mean, we invited Tim on, and he chose Fight Club, and I'm glad he did, because I thought he would pick something different, but he chose Fight Club, and I think both of us, we both came down positively about this movie. It was, even though it's a dark movie and it's a heavy subject matter, and it's not really, there's not too many niceties in it. It looks really good, and they film it in such a way that it's pretty and it's clean and it's polished. And in my opinion, I think this is probably one of David Fincher's best movies. I know he did kind of unpack some of the deeper meanings behind it. But I mean, overall, I think we had a good time, and I just want to thank Tim for joining us, and hope that he comes back again in the future.
Yeah, Fight Club for me, I mentioned last time, it's just one of those movies that was easy to brush off. I got what it was trying to say, and then I moved on. But then some people obviously took the messages of the movie to heart, mostly in the wrong ways. It's funny when you make a movie that's anti-mob mentality, anti-violence, anti-sexist stuff like that, people will watch it and they'll take it as pro-mob mentality. They'll take it as pro-violence. So in a way, I would say that the movie's irresponsible in just throwing those things out there. But again, like Tim said, art needs to take chances. Art needs to stab at things and give you the chance to process them. And obviously, it's going to have different meanings and have different effects. And even though it wasn't one of my favorites, that conversation, talking about all the themes, toxic masculinity, all that, it raised my appreciation for the movie. So even though I like it more now than I did before, it still didn't make my top 3 when we did our top 3s. But it's definitely a deep movie that's going to have different meanings each time you watch it. It's fascinating seeing how people react. So, and Fight Club, a good 90s movie to discuss and talk about the impact that it had. So
yeah, definitely.
Yes, thank you, Tim, for coming on and broadening our horizons, I guess, so to speak, for this movie that's already broadened our horizons. So let's go ahead and move on to From Dusk Till Dawn. Again, we'll be chatting with Lindsay Washburn. But before we do that, let's go ahead and watch the trailer.
Okay.
Everybody be cool. You be cool. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Low profile. You understand the meaning of the words low profile?
Sure. 2 of America's most dangerous criminals have taken hostages.
What is this? It's called a punch. I'm going to ask you one question, and all I want is a yes or no answer. Do you want to live through this?
Yes.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
One night is all that stands between them and freedom.
This is my kind of place.
But it's going to be one hell of a night.
We might be in trouble. There are a bunch of vampires out there trying to get in here and suck our
Now, their only chance is to fight back.
Oh, yeah!
Harvey Keitel, George Clooney, Quentin Tarantino, Juliette Lewis.
Welcome to slavery.
No thanks. I already had a wife.
From dusk till dawn.
Okay, From Dusk Till Dawn from 1996, directed by Robert Rodriguez with a screenplay by Quentin Tarantino, starring Quentin Tarantino with also co-starring George Clooney, Harvey Keitel, Juliette Lewis, Fred Williamson, Tom Savini, Danny Trejo, Cheech Marin, a bunch of other guys.
Cheech Marin. He's in there.
Yeah. There's 3. And I marked it. I seem to remember, I think he played like multiple characters. So each time I was like, oh, Cheech Marin number 1, Cheech Marin number 2. So, all right. So John, we wanted to welcome our next guest, and I'm going to read this just to be sure that I have it right. She is a YouTuber, a podcaster, a Crohn's disease advocate, an actress, star of movies, including The Caribbean Heist, The Eyes of Isabel, short films Polar, For Worse, and The Devil's Corkscrew. She's the co-host of a co-host of the Bad Movie Night podcast, runs her own YouTube channel where she reviews current films, talks about her love for schlocky 80s classics, showcases her vast VHS collection, and unboxes new VHS purchases and more. And for these reasons and many, many more is why we are honored to welcome the Lindsay Washburn. Lindsay, how are you doing?
Yeah,
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here. This is a movie I haven't really talked about a lot on my channel or guesting on other people's channels. So I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, we're doing our 90s Palooza this season. And when I reached out to you, I was like, if you want to be on our podcast, like shoot some titles at me. And you shot like Jackie Brown and a couple others. And From Dusk Till Dawn was one. And I thought, since she likes, we'll talk about it. I don't know if your whole life is schlock.
It's right up my alley.
Yeah, I thought that we could kind of fit that in. But yeah, again, it's an honor to have you on. I know your YouTube, man, you got so many videos and you're so funny. Just today, I was listening to your episode where you're doing your 5 favorite horror remakes, and I embarrassed myself in public because you were talking about The Fly, and you said, this movie brings the yuck. And I laughed out loud, and people looked at me, and I was like, sorry. So just letting you know. That's
awesome.
the kind of,
I appreciate that.
Okay. So we want to talk about From Dusk Till Dawn and the Tarantino. Man, he's going to come up a lot on this podcast this season. just through no fault of his own. So Robert Rodriguez is obviously very big. So if you could explain, everybody already knows about me and Jonny, and they're tired of hearing about you. If you could explain, like, who are you, Lindsay? Like, where do you come from? Like, what is your specialty? Like, am I describing you correctly? Is there anything I got wrong in that intro? Like, how would you describe the Lindsay Washburn?
I think you nailed it. With my channel, I just try to be myself, and I keep it very conversational. I don't script out my stuff. I might have a note or two, but that's it. And I think that lends to keeping it conversational and natural. And I think that's what I go for the most, is just to be myself as much as possible and be honest.
Yeah. So is it just the schlock that you cover? How would you describe Lindsay Washburn, the YouTube channel?
You'll get a wide range of films that I talk about, because I love all sorts of films. I mean, I have my niches that I kind of like to go down, like horror and exploitation and 80s movies. But I also like, the prestige pictures and some foreign films. And so you'll get a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I think it's important when you run a podcast or a YouTube channel that you cover not just your niche, but also new stuff. Like, I know you just did your review of Pearl.
Yes.
I wrote to you, I really like that you did a reaction video for Logan Paul, like reviewing Nope of all things.
Oh gosh, I had to. Because I didn't disagree with everything he said. I just had questions of why he was asking the things he was asking, and one of them wasn't even a question. I'm just like, I don't know what you're looking for, dude.
Well, one of the things we talk about too is like social media, like gives the wrong people a bullhorn. It's like, look,
yes, it does.
Why are you talking? Why should I care what you think about Nope? Look, I don't even know who you are. Looking for, like, what is this?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good to have that well-rounded. Again, we can see your background behind you, your vast VHS collection. What is it about VHS that you particularly like? What's the draw? I mean, what obsesses you and makes VHS like enduring and fun?
Well, anyone who doesn't say nostalgia is at least a part of it is lying.
Yeah.
Because nostalgia is very much a part of it. There's really no video stores anymore. There's one or two, boutique shops, and they're great. I've gotten tapes from them. They're awesome. But the days of Friday and Saturday nights going to Blockbuster or Hollywood Video or your local mom and pop shop, that's over. That's over. And as a kid, I was very much into movies, watch them on TNT, TBS, HBO when you would get the free weekend. So that's where I first discovered movies.
Yeah.
But back in the day, it wasn't streaming. So a lot of these films you would catch in the middle of, or 3/4 of the way through, or they'd be heavily edited. Sometimes not. If you watched them way later, like after 11, I think they'd show boobs. So, So then I would go rent these movies so I could watch the whole thing. And the first piece of my VHS collection when I started collecting was I wanted the pre-special edition original trilogy Star Wars.
Yeah.
I sought those out, and I think I have like 4 or 5 box sets now of that trilogy, a couple different releases, the pre-special edition stuff, and it just grew from there because I would find so many movies that I would rent as a kid and as a teenager. Some of these never made the jump to DVD, and luckily places like Vinegar Syndrome, etc., are bringing these films to Blu-ray and 4K and stuff. And like you said, when you gave your intro of me, I'm also a Crohn's disease advocate. Well, I was diagnosed when I was like 17, my last year of high school. And I was very sick for the next couple years. And so I couldn't go anywhere. All my friends left and went to college. And so my escape was movies. And I would go rent as many as they would let me, and I would just watch them all like back to back as much as I could. And so that's what really drives my passion.
Okay. Yeah. That's one of the reasons I feel like, again, I didn't really want to broach it if you didn't want to talk about it.
No, I am always open to talk about it.
Yeah. So you and I have that in common. You've got Crohn's and I've got like I've been diagnosed with the colitis, like right below you. So one of the things that really aside from the VHS stuff, because again, I was a VHS kid. I remember going to New York during the summertime, and my grandpa, my old Chinese grandpa, every day he would take me down to the video store and we would rent these movies. And so, you know, I remember, so you go to these video stores, right? Again, I'm going to come back around to the concert. But anyway, so you know, these video stores and everything. And so the horror section was kind of tucked away in the corner. And so even though I never got to rent those movies, I remember seeing covers like The Gorgor Girls and Maniac and Scanners, Chopping Mall, and
Yes,
Evil Dead 2, all these that I was kind of scared of, but still really interested in. And so you covering those VHS titles, a lot of those are really familiar to me because I remember seeing those. So that was one thing. Another thing too is I had a flare up earlier this year.
yeah,
And the problem with that is that not a lot of people around me, and you probably the same, know what we're going through, right?
exactly.
And my wife, again, she's been with me the whole time, but there's still she said to me multiple times, I wish I knew what I could do to help you. Like there's nothing.
Yes.
And so knowing that you're an advocate of these things, I reached out to you on Twitter and I, you know, said, by the way, I'm having a flare up. Do you recommend everything? You recommended foods and your experience. And I wanted you to know that gave me a great sense of comfort at that time earlier this year. And so you were a great helper back then. And so that was just, aside from the VHS thing, that was one thing that I really appreciated about you.
And that's why I share as much as I do online, because these diseases, they're kind of taboo because of the symptoms involved, whatever. People don't like to talk about them. A lot of people might know someone who has it or a relative that has it. But there's still a lot of misconceptions about it. And the day-to-day stuff that people who have our kind of affliction go through, and the medical trauma that we go through is extremely difficult to deal with. And I think, you know, I've had people message me from the videos I've done and the posts I've made saying, oh my gosh, I went through this too. And you know, I like to watch your videos when I'm in the hospital, stuff like that, you know, and that helps me get through my shit, you know, that my experience can help other people or help people understand just a little better.
Yeah. And that's another thing I appreciate. You're very frank in those videos. Again, you have a playlist for them in case anybody's interested. And you're very upfront, not just about that, but also your video reviews. And again, just very funny and very whip smart and very, I don't know what's the word, approachable. Like you're very human, I guess you could say. So that's I'm pretty chill person. Right. They're also great at the analysis. So we appreciate that.
Lindsay, I got a quick question for you. About your love for VHS. Tell me, how many VHSs do you own? Do you have a number to that? How many do you have?
Well, I have several stacks sitting over here off camera that I need to put away and scan it, because I have an app on my phone to track everything. I haven't scanned in everything yet, but I think I'm over 400 at this time. I'm closing in on 500.
Do you also have a DVD copy of the same movie? Do you have it?
No.
VHS? Okay, so just VHS.
Just VHS.
Okay.
And you have a working VHS player?
I have 3.
Oh, okay. Because the one that we have in our house, it eats every tape that we put.
Oh no, that happens. That happens. It's really sad when like you get a rare title and you stick it in, and all of a sudden you hear strange noises coming from the VHS. You're like, no.
Because Darin and I both had our own collections of VHS movies, and throughout the years, his is always more, you know, vast and expensive than mine, but his is always more impressive. But you know, I tried to keep mine as long as I could. When the DVDs started coming out, I didn't try to buy DVDs at all. I tried to keep with my VHSs because I love them so much. And then finally, we converted over to DVD, and then we kept the VHSs. But then when we moved to New York, we just got rid of them all. And I wish we hadn't, because there's lots of movies that I think I own that I don't anymore because they were on VHS. You know what I mean? So you probably don't have that problem, but I wish I still had some movies that I still owned on VHS.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The other positive thing about keeping VHS is all these movies behind me I had to replace. So at one point I owned all of these in VHS. So don't
Wow.
let's not talk about how much money
It does save you shelf space.
it does.
From Dusk Till Dawn, though, I own that on VHS, and I thought for sure I still owned it. So I was trying to find it. Like, where is that movie? I thought I owned this movie, but I couldn't find it. And oh yeah, VHS. That's why.
Well, Lindsay, that's great. Again, it's that nostalgia. I love, again, another thing that ties in. I love that you're able to hold on to that and talk about those things. And another quote that obviously I quoted you for those reasons and much, much more there. But another quote that you say in your videos, especially your rankings for the 80s ones that you just did, is this is the quote, "I don't necessarily think these are the best things, but they are my favorite and they're subject to change on a weekly basis." I think
Oh, yes.
that speaks to me, that speaks to Jonny. That's important because there's a distinction. Like if you say, that the Goonies is your favorite or Friday the 13th Part 10 is your favorite, there's going to be a certain sect of people that are going to look at you and go, you obviously don't know anything about it. Right. So
Exactly.
I don't think that's fair. But what you do by saying that these aren't necessarily the best, that kicks a lot of the shit off the table. You know what I mean?
It does.
Basically, and helps people approach you. So
I get into conversations with people who have differing movie opinions. I never approach it like they're wrong because I didn't experience the movie the way they did at all. Everybody's movie watching experience is different. So what hits for you may not hit for me. I bring my whole time on this earth of experiences into watching a film. So everything is going to affect me differently than it does the person sitting next to me. And so I try to keep that in mind and listen to what they're saying and be like, oh, okay, I could see that. Yeah, okay, I'll give it to you. I saw it this way. I mean, I've seen some wrong opinions on Twitter sometimes.
Logan Paul.
Like Logan Paul. But I mean, then I don't really engage because I'm like, I don't need to change this person's mind. I don't want to change this person's mind. I mean, I have my thoughts about films and things that I enjoy and things that are my favorite and that I love. And I don't want anyone else to try to change that for me. So.
Right. Yeah. Very, very important. I think on Twitter, especially, that's, the Twitter world is much different from the actual world. I think people on Twitter think that this is what life is, and it's not. You talk about not wanting to change people's minds. Even when you say you like a movie, it's annoying that somebody's going to jump on and say, well, let me change your mind about that because you shouldn't like it. So again, being able to get that off the table, that's very important for us. So, From Dusk Till Dawn, we obviously we're going to miss the Halloween, the way that I tried to schedule this as a Halloween episode, but we're about 3 weeks behind when this is going to be released. But I still think it's good to have some distance in between Tarantino movies.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, it's just going to be the Tarantino season with us.
Yes.
But I think it's still a pretty important conversation. So Jonny and I, during our Pulp Fiction episode, we already talked about how we were introduced to Quentin Tarantino. So this is going to be like a multiple question, multiple tier thing. But
okay.
How were you introduced to Tarantino? How were you introduced to Robert Rodriguez?
I was introduced to Tarantino first, and my parents actually rented Pulp Fiction and brought it home for us to watch as a family, I guess.
Cool.
And it blew my mind. It just blew my mind because I'd never seen a movie like that before. And so I'm like, I want to see more of this guy's stuff. What has he done? I tried to, I asked the people at the video store, do you have anything else by this guy? Whatever. And so that's how I found Reservoir Dogs and True Romance. And I had seen Natural Born Killers, but I didn't know that, he was part of that. With Robert Rodriguez, after seeing Dusk Till Dawn, I was like, oh, this guy's kind of cool. So El Mariachi, Desperado. This movie was a gateway for me to Rodriguez, where Pulp Fiction was a gateway for Tarantino.
Okay. Jonny, how about you? Robert Rodriguez, how did he become a household name for you?
Well, you introduced me to him because, in fact, my first experience with him was, I believe, From Dusk Till Dawn. In fact, we've talked this before on our podcast. There's this one night where I was at your house and we popped in True Romance. And so we watched True Romance and you said, you want something else that Gary Oldman's in? I was like, sure. So you popped in Dracula. So we watched, True Romance and then Dracula. And then it wasn't quite morning yet. She's like, you want to watch From Dusk Till Dawn? I was like, sure. So we watched that movie and then the sun came up and I was like, oh, we've got all night watching movies. And vampire movies at that. But anyway, that was my first experience with Robert Rodriguez. And I think after that, you showed me El Mariachi and Desperado. We saw Desperado in the theater together, though.
Yeah. Well, El Mariachi, obviously, that was the, what was he, 24 when he directed El Mariachi? Yeah. And I don't know when I was introduced to that. I know it was pretty early on before From Dusk Till Dawn. I just remember El Mariachi being a very, like, a tight movie, a tight, fun, like low budget. And when you hear the history and the making of it, how he would do like a shot and then zoom in and do another take or another line of dialogue and then zoom, just the way he had this guerrilla style of filmmaking to save money and make a movie for $7,000 that looks like that. There's so much humor and so much fun and movement to El Mariachi. And Desperado, I think when that came out too, even though I appreciate Desperado less because I think there's less to that movie, even though it's really fun. But when you saw that in theaters and the action, Antonio Banderas, obviously sexy man, that Antonio Banderas is doing all those moves, that was another, so he was a voice. And then obviously Tarantino being in Desperado was a way to introduce that. So yeah, I mean, Robert Rodriguez, and we'll talk about this, when he makes a movie, like if you look at his Spy Kids movies and, even Adventures of Shark Boy and Lava Girl, I think that's the title of it. But he has, I call it like, when he makes a movie, it's like, hey guys, we're making a movie. And that excitement comes through when he's shooting movies. And so Rodriguez is just this very fun, kind of off the cuff kind of director. I really like that about him. So Lindsay, how were you introduced to From Dusk Till Dawn? I mean, was that a convergence of Rodriguez and Tarantino?
Yeah, because I didn't see it in the theater, but I spotted it at the video store, and I saw Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, and it looked like kind of like a horror movie, blah blah blah. And so I grabbed it, I took it home, and I was very surprised because you start off watching one movie, and then all of a sudden it's a completely different story.
Yeah, that was a big sticking point, I know, with a lot of critics. Critics, first of all, and Lindsay, maybe you'll probably agree with this, they don't seem to give horror a fair shake.
No. Horror's like the redheaded stepchild of movie genres.
Unless it's, what's the term that they're using? Was it prestige horror? What's the term that they're using now?
I think it's prestige horror, yeah.
Okay, which is a way, like hoity-toity way of appealing to critics that this is okay, that kind of thing. But even movies like The Conjuring, which is just Poltergeist, it's just a scare movie, but people are like, this is evil and this is stupid. I think critics watch these movies and they don't like that a movie's making them jump or squeal like a little girl. You know what I mean? And so when you read the reviews of From Dusk Till Dawn, obviously people are impressed by Tarantino, and especially during that first half. And then when the vampire stuff takes over, that's what a lot of the critics focus on. It's like, this isn't for me. You can obviously feel that. Was that your feeling towards From Dusk Till Dawn, Lindsay, when you first saw it, or was it all of a piece with you?
Oh no, I had almost the complete opposite reaction, because it merges two styles that I absolutely love. You have this gritty action film, just bloody, shootouts, all this kind of stuff going on, and then you have this crazy gonzo horror schlocky vampire stuff, and people are turning into vampires, and there's naked ladies everywhere, and Marin is saying some outlandish stuff.
Wow. Yeah.
It was great. No, I fell in love with this movie the first time I saw it.
Okay. Well, I would describe this as a Grindhouse movie, right? It's like,
no, it is very much so.
It's like Grindhouse, but opposite. So in the Grindhouse movie that they released together, you have the Planet Terror that is the Gonzo, and then you have oh my gosh, Death Proof. I can't believe that's like, I like that one a lot. I can't believe that slipped my mind. But now it's the opposite. It's like Death Proof starts it and Planet Terror finishes it.
Yes.
And then also it feels like, since you're talking about VHS, it feels like you rent like a hostage thriller from the video store. And halfway through, the owner or something, or the kid working, decided to splice in a vampire.
Oh yes.
And all of a sudden it switches and you're like, wait, what is this? I think that's kind of Jonny, what was your experience? Was that how you, was the juxtaposition of genres in the movie, was that jarring for you when you first saw it? I don't know if you've had this conversation.
It was. And I think my experience was I was really getting involved in the first part of the story. I loved Seth and Richard. I wanted to find what was going to happen to those characters, and I wanted to go on that ride with them. And when it jumped to the vampire stuff, it just lost me completely. Not that I can't appreciate, horror or vampire or the gore for the sake of gore and violence, all that kind of stuff's fun and it has its place. But I felt like this was the wrong movie to put that in, because there was a story that was being told that didn't get finished being told. And I was like, well, what happens? What really happens? They don't go to the bar and fight vampires. Something else actually happens in this story. I know there's a different story here. My problem. I want to see the rest of the movie that they were starting to tell that they didn't finish. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
No,
it does.
it does. No, because they set up the characters are very well written.
Yeah.
Very well written. And so you want to see the story that they started in. You want to see the fruition of that. And it just gets interrupted. It hits by a bus. That's another completely other film.
And they set up, Jacob is the preacher who's lost his faith and all that. And I thought there's got to be something. Why is that even in there? What's the point of that if he's not going to somehow regain his faith or have his faith restored, all that kind of stuff. And I want to see like the progression of that story and those characters as well.
Yeah, and so Lindsay, when you hear people react like that, you think that's a fair reaction to it? I mean, not obviously everybody's going to jibe with what happens.
Oh no, I think it's a fair reaction because it's such a turn and it happens very quickly.
Yeah.
Because if you went into this thing cold and you didn't see any trailers or anything like that, because it kind of gave it away in that first trailer. I think they show the bats flying down that one corridor when they're running away. So if you didn't know, you'd be like, what is happening? What's going on? Why is there green blood? And yeah. So no, it's very understandable.
Yeah, I think the trailers in a way kind of spoiled this. We did a Forrest Gump episode, and I remember seeing that without seeing a trailer, and then watching the trailer, attaching it to our episode. It was like, this thing gives away the entire movie. Like, it would not be the same experience if I were to sit down in the theater knowing what was going to happen, as opposed to how I did see it going blind. I think that's important. And again, when I saw the movie, I saw it in the theater, and I saw it by myself, snuck in or something like that. I don't think I was old enough. Wait, no, I was 19, so I would have been old enough to see it. So walking in, I think I did see the trailers, and so I was prepared for it. I knew that, and I was maybe watching for the signs. But the other thing that Tarantino especially does is he introduces us, I think, to these genres that maybe we're not used to.
Yes.
I knew that horror was a thing. I knew that gore was a thing. I knew that maniac was a thing with exploding heads and things like that. But grindhouse wasn't a term that was even in my head, right? So is that something, Lindsay, that you appreciate Tarantino doing, that he was able to bring like your love of horror and stuff like that and these grindhouse things?
Oh yeah, I love that he has those sensibilities because he brings them to these multi-million-dollar movies he makes now. Because he started off working in the video store and watching all of these old grindhouse films and schlocky horror, and with all these crazy effects and outrageous characters and violence and sex. And so I love that he brings that, and it just kind of permeates everything that he does.
Right. So, okay. So we each had like a topic we wanted to bring to this. We don't want to usurp your topic. So what did you want to talk about or bring up, particularly with this movie?
Yeah. And it kind of goes into what I just said about him bringing those sensibilities is kind of what my topic is about. And that this film is kind of a love letter to all of those kind of movies, because Robert Rodriguez loves those kinds of movies as well. And so bringing them both together, it's no wonder that they work so well together, the two of them, because you can see it with just the subject matter, the shooting style, the credit sequence, even, and the people that populate this film, even in just little cameos, and then, supporting characters. Things like that, because you get Tom Savini and Fred the Hammer Williamson, John Saxon, Michael Parks, who recreates that character in later Robert Rodriguez and Tarantino films. So it's got all this genre grime to it, and I really, really like that.
Yeah, it's a good. Tom Savini's big because obviously Dawn of the Dead, stuff like that. It's fun seeing him in here. He's not the best actor, you know what I mean? When he's beating up the vampires and things like that, you can tell that he's not quite nailing that choreography. But I think it works for the schlockiness of the turn, like, and everything after it. But yeah, I do think that's important, being able to know where these things are. You know, we're talking about critics and how they don't appreciate horror. When you look at like gore effects, that's an art.
Oh,
right?
it is. And Tom Savini is one of the best to ever do it. Like the stuff that he did with Dawn of the Dead and stuff like that, and Maniac, and he has such a vast resume. And the people that are doing that kind of stuff now, I mean, practical effects are few and far between now because a lot of stuff's done digitally, but practical effects people doing it now, they learn stuff from Tom Savini, you know, they look up to him. He because I think I haven't confirmed this, it might be an internet rumor, but that he would pattern a lot of his gore after stuff he saw in the Vietnam War. So I mean, he it's very realistic, and he just makes everything look icky.
Yeah, and again, you being able to appreciate all these horror movies, I wish I was like that. Like, I wish I could sit down and watch a Friday the 13th Part 4. But my thing is, like, I don't mind the gore. I love that it's there's an art to it. But I personally, like, I need something to engage my brain, like, with these horror. So Dawn of the Dead works because it has the consumerism context, right?
Yeah.
Something like RoboCop works because it's capitalism. So it has like a brain going on. I don't mean to disparage like people's work.
Oh no.
And again, The Fly, which we mentioned before, like the effects in that, or The Thing. I really enjoyed you taking your friend Crystal, and that was a funny video because the dread in The Thing was baked into your video, just waiting to see her reaction to it. I thought that was really funny. But like, you know, there's an art to those things. The Thing and The Fly, especially when I was a kid, I was turned off by them because they were just, it was too much. Like it didn't work for me. And so I kind of like, I didn't want to. But as an adult, and The Thing being like a story about paranoia and not trusting what you see. So the gore ties into that theme. With The Fly, having a grandma that died of cancer and watching her body wither away and kind of fall apart. When I watched The Fly after that experience, I was able to appreciate that movie on a deeper, much deeper level. And so that, I love horror when it engages my brain like that. I mean, Jonny, I know that you grew up on horror. How does your brain, is it the same way? Or are you kind of in the middle with me and Lindsay, or how?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I did grow up with horror, and I find it fascinating back when I was younger, but for some reason, like, I have a hard time watching horror nowadays. I just can't do it. I can't tell you how many times I've actually put in From Dusk Till Dawn, and then as soon as the vampires show up, I just turned it off. Like, I just don't need to watch that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it happens every time. I had a hard time getting through it this time, actually. I want to make sure I got through it for the podcast, but I was like, oh man, I gotta force myself to watch this vampire stuff. But anyway, back when I was younger, I would have loved that. It would have been my thing. I loved The Fly. I loved The Thing. I loved the Friday the 13th, so the Nightmare on Elm Streets. Those were my movies back then. But now, like, it doesn't mean anything to me. In fact, I just try to avoid it whenever I can.
Interesting.
Weird.
Lindsay, do you want to yell at Jonny for any of that?
Oh no, not at all. I have lots of friends that are not horror people at all. They just don't do them. Because I can definitely I appreciate all types of horror. I think it's a genre that you can do so much with, and you can mix with any other genre. You can always add or find horror or horrific elements in any genre of movie. And like, I had seen quite a bit of horror as a kid. You know, growing up in Iowa in the Midwest, there's not a lot going on, small town. So your escape is, you know, through the TV. And so a lot of Friday the 13th, a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street, Return of the Living Dead, you know, stuff like that, Hellraiser. And so back then, as a kid, it's more of a shock factor. It's you're getting away with something. You're watching something you're not supposed to be watching, you know. Right. I think that's the allure for kids watching horror, a lot of kids. And as I got older, and like I talked about, when I was 17, I got very, very sick. So I really dove into horror at that point. And I think that for me, that's when I really started broadening my horizons with horror. And for me, it just, because I just felt extremely lonely and I was very, very sick. And for me, sometimes horror, and I think for a lot of people, is a way to confront your own mortality in an odd way.
Yeah.
And so I think through my brain process, it was a comfort to me, and and that's when I started appreciating the practical effects and things like that. And ever since then, I've just always really loved horror.
Yeah, I'm not going to knock anybody's opinion for liking it. There's something about going through a horror movie that's really horrific and coming out on the other side and feeling like you've survived something. It gives you. So I'm not going to knock that at all. The only thing I would disagree with is if you walked out and you grabbed the chainsaw and started chainsawing people.
Exactly.
There's a difference. It's just about you.
Oh yeah, and a lot of horror is they're thrill rides. It's like getting on a roller coaster. You just strap yourself in and scream or jump or whatever, put your arms up, they're just a thrill ride.
Yeah. And even something like The Conjuring, I don't think there's really a point to it other than scaring you. I get a kick out of the ingenuity to how they set up all these suspense sequences and just how all that works. So, and then, you bring in genres, the interesting thing, the most interesting takeaway from the movie that I had this time, and we'll get this out of the way, is so it's the hostage thriller, and then it becomes a vampire movie, and in the middle, obviously, exploitation movies of the 80s, which were able to get away with a lot. And that's when kids, like when we were teenagers, we'd want to rent these movies because there was a chance we'd see boobs, stuff. And that was the whole point. So in the scene where they go into the titty twister in this movie, instead of, I don't remember my reaction when I saw it in the theater the first time. Obviously I was 19. It was probably a little bit different than it was now. But being so old, I don't have time to get involved that way. So when Salma Hayek is doing her dance, and obviously if you're 19, you're going to think of it different. But I was just cackling the whole time because I knew exactly the mood that they were going for, with the effect it was trying to have. And when she lifts up her leg and licks her knee, and I was like, ooh, that would hurt if I tried. So that's that's the stuff that went through. So I just thought it was really funny, all the stuff and what it was doing. If you're aware of what's happening, and then I think, they're obviously aping this. I think that's the fun of watching these movies, I guess you could say.
Oh yeah.
And Jonny, what topic did you want to talk about with this movie?
Well, I want to focus on Tarantino a little bit, even though we're, we have a lot of him this season. But I'm glad he didn't direct this movie. I'm really happy that he found somebody else. I know he was going to direct it. And I know they wanted to get Robert Kurtzman at first, and then he couldn't do it, and they went to Rodriguez. But I think Rodriguez did a really good job as a director in this movie, and I think it would have been a different movie had Tarantino directed it. So I don't know. I'm happy that it ended up the way it did. At least the first half. The first half is phenomenal. But yeah, and also Tarantino playing Richie in this movie. I think I did read a few reviews where they were saying he shouldn't be in this movie. They didn't do a good job or whatever. I forget who said it, but I was disagreeing with that because I think this is actually one of Tarantino's best performances of his career. Like you can tell it's Tarantino when he plays Jimmy in Pulp Fiction. You can tell it's Tarantino, when he's in Reservoir Dogs, Mr. Brown. That's Tarantino. Yes. But this is Richie Gecko. It's different. He's a character this time. He actually gave it his all, and he went all the way into it, and it was believable. I believed it. So I was really impressed with his performance in this one, even though he plays a really creepy, kind of a.
Well, how weird is it that he's so believable?
He's really good at it. And I mean, Robert Rodriguez directed this, but I'm sure Tarantino had a hand in all those foot shots.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's a note that I had, is like, in today's day and age and knowing what we know about Tarantino, right? Is there an actress alive that would willingly stick her toes into his mouth? I don't know. It's just there. A lot of that stuff I think was, Jonny, you said that you wanted that story to continue, but something that I was relieved by, especially being the father of a daughter who's, I think, is one of the most beautiful creatures on the planet. But being a father of that stuff, this time especially, really, I was like unnerved by it in a particular way. And so again, with you're talking about the direction, I think it feels like a Tarantino movie in the beat. It's very restrained. And aside from the occasional flourish, like the walking away from the explosion shot that they in the beginning, or the iris in shot where you see, is it Gloria? Is that the name of the bank teller? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Okay. When it shows her in the back, other than those little flourishes, you even have the trunk shot that Tarantino.
Yeah, trunk shot.
So I think that the tension is built so well during that first half. Like what happens to the bank teller when they go and they kidnap the Fullers? That's their name, right? The family of the Fullers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
When they kidnap them, the hairs are sticking up because you know this can go bad, especially the way that Richie is looking at Kate. You know?
Yeah.
And I really like when they stop at the border or whatever, and it's Seth and it's Richie and it's Kate in the bathroom, and Seth is starting to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
And where the first sign of tension that was relieved is when Seth knocks him out. Right. And then they have a moment. Well, first of all, like Richie has the gun to Kate's mouth. I got a kick out of when he pulls the gun away. You see Juliette Lewis go, like she messes with her cheek. I thought that was funny and a little like perverse in a way, I guess you could say. But when Seth hits Richie and knocks him out and they have that quiet moment and Kate goes, thank you. I laughed. And that was the first like relief. Other than, Michael Parks, the first note I have with Michael Parks is, I love how this nonsense between Pete and Earl is so elaborate. Like they build this whole world, but it's ultimately pointless.
Yes.
Because they kill him. And again, Lindsay, you talked about like being shootouts and things like that. And then when it gets to the titty twister and it has that turn with the green blood and the knife, it becomes a Robert Rodriguez movie where it's and I think
camera moves a lot more in that second half.
Yeah. So again, it feels like a different movie. And I think we're in agreement that was maybe the point. Right? You wanted to feel like a different. I mean, Lindsay, is that something that you?
I would say so. It was definitely like a lot of like sweeping cameras and more zoom ins and crazy angles and stuff like that. I think that was deliberate because not just are we, now there's vampires, but we're changing everything, including how we're shooting this, how we're approaching everything. Everything is different now.
Right. And then, like I was saying, when it becomes that Rodriguez movie, you have the schlocky special effects, you have the gags. I liked a lot of the gags. There's a part where Sabini is tossing the strippers onto the table legs. And the last person he throws is like, wait, I'm a dancer. And he still throws her anyway. And then when you see their bodies, hers is the only that's not a vampire. I thought that was a nice gag. Or I like when they kill the Danny Trejo character and his face melts and his eyeballs like roll into the side pockets of the pool and makes the pool.
Yeah, that was great.
Right.
So it has all these gags. I just think if there's any pushback for me from the movie, it's not so much the turn, because I get what they're trying to do. It's just the tone of the two parts are so
very different. Yes.
So it takes a second. By the time that there's the standoff with those the ugly strippers or whatever that are vampires, and you have the Frost character, the sex machine, you have what's the preacher's name?
Jacob.
Jacob. You have him, you have Seth standing there, there's a standoff. That's when I was back on board and I kind of got back into the vibe of what that second movie was.
Because there's a lot of horror. I mean, there's a whole subgenre, but a lot of horror is very funny, has a lot of humor injected into it, and there's a lot of humor behind it. I mean, I know people that just cackle at some of the Friday the 13th kills. I have a couple that I think are pretty funny.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that, again, it's such a different tone from the first, where we only have maybe one or two moments of levity. And then the second half, the shots, each character's got its gimmick, and it's campy and funny, and those are great elements to pull into that second half. Yeah,
just a little bit of a side note. You mentioned the Friday the 13th. I'm not a huge fan of that series because I think it's mostly just kill. So, and that's fine. It's just not. I'd rather be doing something else. But then you have Jason Lives and you have the New Blood, and they start like integrating like this humor into it. My favorite kill in the whole franchise is when the girl sticks her head out in the New Blood and he shoves the party horn into her eye and it honks. I got a big kick out of that. So you're right. It's people kind of push back against gore, but I think the gore in here it's fun and it's over the top to the point where, that's gross. They have a legless vampire that's crawling towards Kate. That's an effective shot, and it's unnerving, but I don't know. It's just kind of there's that humor that kind of takes the edge off of that goriness. And so that's another thing that I appreciate. But again, that ties in with Rodriguez's, I'm making a movie, isn't this great? You know, it has that attitude that I love.
Like when Cheech Marin's eyeballs explode and shoot their goo all over Julia Lewis.
And I kept asking myself, why is that happening? Like, why does Sabini turn into a different monster? Like, I kept doing that. And then all of a sudden I'd be like, well, it's fun.
It's fun.
Yeah. So that's the only reason that it's happening. They're indulging, and it's gross. Like when the eyeballs squirt all over Kate, it's like, ugh. But you know, it's funny. Like it kind of works. I don't know, Jonny, does the humor help those scenes for you at all? Is it just still the gore?
I see what you guys are saying. I can see why you think it's funny, and there are some horror films that I do think are funny, but I just, like I say, I just can't. I have a hard time with this one for some reason. I don't know why, but I also, the rules, they didn't follow the rules with every single character. Like when they get bit by one vampire, sometimes they change right away. Sometimes it take an hour to change, and it was like, well, at least have the rules, be followed, for everybody. And that bothered me. And also how they could die too. Like sometimes you get hit by the light and explode right away, and sometimes you get hit by an arrow and explode. And I was like, well, what is it? Which one makes you explode? The arrow or the light or the cross in your mouth? What makes you explode? You know what I mean? Like, it was always different, and so I didn't understand. So that's funny, I guess.
The holy water was different. It just set them on fire.
Or like made their face kind of melt.
Yeah, it melted them.
The holy water in the condoms. We need to point that out.
Yes, in condoms, yes. Because it couldn't just be regular water balloons. Had to be condoms.
And then why? I guess the thing I laughed at is, why would a trucker have a crossbow? I don't know.
I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that question, except the trucker that has a crossbow.
Right. Yeah, it's fun. And, I noticed too, like the first half, I really like the dialogue. When it's Tarantino, I like like, I have 6 friends and they all run faster than you. I love that. The Ramblers, let's get rambling, even though they took that from Reservoir Dogs. So I liked all that. And then when the horror stuff kicked in, I didn't get the same vibe from the dialogue after that. Like the dialogue wasn't as enjoyable because the makeup all of a sudden was what you were focusing on. Right. And then luckily at the end, I think, so it's a Tarantino movie to begin with, then it becomes a Rodriguez movie. And then for the last, the way they kill Jacob off, the way they kill Seth, the way they kill him off, I wrote down, what a cold, cruel kill, but I think that it takes that's what the Tarantino kind of seeps back in. It's a cold ending when Seth is talking, even though, and the line that I laughed at is at the end when he's like, they weren't psychopaths. Like psychopaths don't explode when light hits them. It doesn't matter how crazy they are.
I love that line.
That brought it back, and it ended like a Tarantino movie for me. So if it ended with the schlock stuff and everybody dead, and then it pulled back like that, I might have reacted differently. I just like that it kind of ended that with the coldness of the situation.
Oh yeah, it brought it screaming back into reality.
Right, which I think is important, especially when you have that beginning. And they spend maybe 2 minutes on it. So that's it. So true. But yeah, so Jonny, was there any other acting things you wanted to talk about? Do we want to talk about Clooney for a minute?
I think George Clooney is great in this character. I love him. He has this little move that he does. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but he has this little eye twitch. Like his eye kind of like twitches a little bit, and it's like, I know he's doing it on purpose, and I think it's really impressive because it's right at the right moment, when he does those things. And so if you watch it closely, you'll watch his little eye twitches. They're awesome. It's great.
Yeah. What about you, Lindsay? What do you think of Clooney?
This is one of my favorite performances of him as well, because he'd done some movies and stuff, but ER was his thing and Tarantino came and directed an episode, and that's how the two of them hooked up. And I think George Clooney credits this movie a lot as well for making his film career as successful as it was, because I think after this he had a romantic comedy, and then Batman and Robin came out.
Yeah.
And so I think he gives a lot of credit. We all know how that ended. I think he gives a lot of credit to this film and his performance in it, and so do I.
Yeah, I have the note here that it's still his regular tics. I think when you're a heartthrob like that, you rely. So he has the head bob and stuff like that. I don't think like Clooney became a movie star for me in Out of Sight. That's when he kind of left all that stuff behind, and he was like, this guy is matinee. Like he's Cary Grant. Like he's got that down. But I do like him in this a lot. Like, what I liked about this is it's the storytelling of, yeah, Seth and Richie are bastards.
Yes.
But it's that old adage of you pit bastards against worse people to make you root for the bastards.
Mm-hmm.
But even before that, Richie's obviously off his rocker. Like, and he has to keep him multiple scenes where he has to shake him, and Seth has to keep him like balanced.
Mm-hmm.
What I liked is when Seth comes back with the big kahuna burgers, you know, he comes back with those, and he opens the door and sees Glory, like the mess, and how they're just like flashing like little glimpses of what's happening.
So effective. So effective.
As opposed to showing you everything, right? I mean, it's more disturbing that way. But what I really liked about that stuff is it sets Seth up, as a bastard, but there are limits to what he did. He even says that, like, I am not this. Like, I robbed banks. You know what I mean? I'm not. What is wrong with you, Richie? Mm-hmm. So when he's telling Jacob later, like, you've seen the way that my brother's looking at your daughter, right? If you stick with me, if you don't screw up and you do everything I say, I will make sure that he keeps his hands off her. And I trust him in that moment, because that's just the kind of character, but we don't know if he's going to be able to control Richie, which I think that's what I was getting to before, is that even though the story doesn't end, I'm glad that they kick Richie out, because I didn't want to see, like, I don't know, it just made me so uncomfortable with that, him attacking or being so, I don't know, icky towards that dog.
You want to see a character like that get their comeuppance, and in my version of the story, Juliette Lewis's character gets Richie, so that's what I think should happen.
Well, isn't that weird? When she sees Salma Hayek turn, the first thing she yells is "Watch out!" or "Richie, watch out!" Like, she tells him to watch out. I was like, oh, interesting.
I don't think she realizes his intentions is the thing, because he has that little fantasy in his head when they first meet, where she turns to him, and he's asking her about that in the RV when they're headed to the border. Like, did you mean what you said back there? She's like, what are you talking about? What I say when? So I think she's a little not oblivious, but isn't picking up on that. So, and by the time they all get to the titty twister, it's like, okay, we've been through something together, kind of the whole thing at the border and stuff. So yes, it's still very much an adversarial relationship. It's like, let's just get this shit done, and then we can all go our separate ways.
Yeah, other than the kidnapping, like, they really haven't done anything to them. So there's maybe she feels like there's a bond. Well, I want to just briefly mention Juliette Lewis. Like, Lindsay, you mentioned that line that she says. Like, Juliette Lewis is game for a lot of stuff, and we've noticed that. I think it's interesting as an actress. Like, she's not like Meryl Streep material, but being able, like, 2 years before this, to be Natural Born Killers, like have her be Mallory, and then the next year seeing her in Strange Days playing a completely different character, and an adult character, you know, with a lot of agency, and then going back to this and just very childlike. It kind of it's a harkening back to Cape Fear, and that's how she kind of got her. And then after this, I think she did The Other Sister or something, like with Gary Marshall, where she played like a mentally handicapped. But how versatile an actress is she, that I can buy her as a killer in Natural Born Killers, and then in this as an innocent girl, like, that isn't affected by that stuff. I'm a big Juliette Lewis fan. I love her performance in Cape Fear. That scene between her and De Niro on the stage is incredible. But she's a character actor. That's what she is. You know, she's not a movie star, you know. She's not a Charlize Theron or whatever, or a Sandra Bullock. She's a female, because usually when you throw around the term character actor, the men is what you think of. It's not really thrown around a lot for actresses, but that is what she is. She is a character actor. Right. I don't think you say character actors, and I think character actors, they kind of have like a look to them, but she's not. I think she's beautiful. Like, she's a beautiful. So she's not. We talked about Brad Pitt earlier. We talked about him during Fight Club during the last episode, and how Brad Pitt is a character actor in a matinee idol's body, just willing to go different places. So Juliette Lewis she's not. What's the name of the actress from Throw Mama from the train in The Goonies?
Anne Ramsey?
Yeah, she's not Anne Ramsey.
No, right? She's not Anne Ramsey. Well, Anne Ramsey always played Anne Ramsey. I mean, she's pretty much the same character.
And that's why you hired her, right?
Yes.
Johnny, what about you and Juliette Lewis? What do you think?
I think she's great in this movie, especially. I like her a lot. I don't have anything bad to say about her. I think she's great.
Yeah. I like there's definitely a character build for her. I like when they're getting all their pull cues and they're killing all the dead bodies and she has a rough time.
Right.
I thought that was really,
And
really
yeah,
funny.
her facial expressions just through that little scene, because she's trying to hype herself up, and then she looks at the guy and he still looks human, and she's like, oh, what? And then she's, trying to hype herself up again, and then he comes to life, and then she starts screaming, and her face is crazy. Just in that little scene, just shows how much range that she has.
Right. Again, very, very good. And Harvey Keitel obviously has that gravitas. I like his scene with Seth where he's like, and he stands up to him like he's a dad, and he's very strong, and he's a pastor, obviously, so he's got able to control situations. But I like when he talks to Seth and he's like, "You've won. Like, why are you like this? Like, enjoy this."
The only person that this up is you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gets to Seth. You know what I mean? Like Seth is, Jacob, have a drink with me, and they're able to bond that way to the point where he depends on Jacob during that last fight. So yeah, there's definitely an arc there, and there's all these. Everybody bounces off each other. You obviously, Cheech Marin playing the three characters. He's a riot in each.
So funny
in each part. So, and then yeah, I guess like we've already covered like my topic. It's the whole like Rodriguez, Tarantino. Do they mesh? Like, is that what's kind of a turnoff for a lot of people? I don't know if critics were using this movie like the switch. I don't know if they're using this as an excuse to lambast it as a horror movie. I don't know. Lindsay, do you have any thoughts on that, or is it just the pushback against horror?
I think a big part of it, especially back then, because horror was in a bad time, because this was like right before Scream came out.
Yeah.
And that's what really revitalized the horror genre, especially for critics.
Right.
And it was, it was much more a mainstream thing, because in the 80s, most horror was slashers, girls running around half naked, screaming, which I love, which is great.
Right.
But then we went into the early 90s and stuff, and horror and fantasy as well just kind of dipped quite a bit. It wasn't popular. It was all this direct to video kind of stuff. A lot of shot on video stuff was coming out. So I think the time that this came out was just a little behind the curve, that horror is back. I think it just missed it.
Right. I think this came out.
If I'm correct on the time, I'm not sure.
Yeah, this came out January, February of '96, and then Scream came out October, November, somewhere around, or December. No, December even. So
okay.
And what do you guys think about that? I think Scream. The thing that I really appreciated about Scream is it took the whole history of horror and was able to tie it and make it a new experience as a horror movie. But it also made critics like, oh, I can appreciate this because this is appealing to me. Do you think that's kind of a cheap way, or do you like that Scream did that for criticism of horror movies?
I love it that it did that, because Scream is a great movie. In Wes Craven, who's one of the figureheads of horror all the way back to the 80s, and he came at horror and the slasher genre with a completely different perspective. And I think every once in a while horror just kind of needs a reset sometimes, just a little refocusing, and then it comes back. I don't think horror will ever be dead or ever go away. I think sometimes it takes something just to get the ball rolling again.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Scream did.
Right. I think when you look at a lot of horror movies, especially during the 70s, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, again, Wes Craven. What's the other? The Hills Have Eyes. That's the other one. It has Vietnam was going on around that time. It was still a lasting. And so the way that, and you talked about Savini having that, the way that the national kind of feel towards Vietnam and the disillusionment kind of wends its way into those horror movies. I think that's why there's a boom, because people wanted that catharsis. They wanted to watch these movies. They felt, and in a way, Star Wars, it's the same thing. It's like people just wanted innocence for that. And with horror, again, it's another way of achieving that and feeling like, you can breathe because there's somebody else out there that's feeling the same way, and you can watch these movies. And then 80s, like exploitation and stuff like that. And I think they just come in different waves. And then after Scream, obviously Kevin Williamson is a huge impact, to the point where Halloween, that arguably started like the slasher genre, becomes a Scream movie. right? Because of the
Mhm.
the humor. I just think, Jonny, is that something that you like? Do you like that at least it brought critics to appreciate horror, or do you see that as kind of like a cynical ploy, an appeal to critics? You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. I mean, I can see what you're talking about as far as like Scream revitalizing the horror genre. I think that's true. I think that happened, and I can appreciate Scream on a certain level. It's not really my cup of tea when it comes to horror. Like I don't know. I'm not into the whole kids in high school thing anymore. I have a
Yeah, you're
hard
not.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a hard time with it. But I mean, I don't know. I go back to my days in horror and you know the Freddys and the Jasons and that to me is what horror is. And so it's hard for me to watch people explode or get their heads chopped off or even just the girls in their underwear running across the street or whatever. Like even that's kind of like, okay, I mean I've seen that. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
so, but again, they did revitalize it and I appreciate that. But like I just think I don't know. Like, I think horror is kind of lost its way in a sense. Because for me, anyway, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
Well, off topic, do you think what about horror today, Lindsay, versus the 80s? How do you think horror today compares?
I think it compares a lot, especially just some of the just insane, crazy gonzo horror that we've gotten this year alone and in last year too. Because I mean, you have X, you have Pearl, Barbarian, Black Phone, a whole host of others. It's been a really great year for horror,
Hmm.
and we're seeing these smaller independent crazier horror films. Malignant last year was the toast of the town. A ton of people went to see that movie. And so I think that is starting to move to the forefront, and more prestige horror is starting to lose its lead a little bit. I think
Well, I think that again, like when The Ring came out, The Ring kind of revitalized things as well.
it did. Yes, it did.
It did start to go downhill again, and The Ring came out and kind of like got everybody excited again.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Well, even that, like The Ring was kind of, and then you had all these other remakes of J-horror movies. I think horror comes in movements, I think, whether it's found footage or...
And then you get Paranormal Activity and what all that spawned,
Yeah, and then it runs its course. I think the only weakness to Scream is they all seem like each sequel's like the same. Like they're all the same movie. Like the beats hit at the same time. I think it would maybe be more interesting if, like, where's the found footage angle for Scream? Like there's all these different movements. I think Scream would be very beneficial for horror. Like once found footage movies kind of lose their way, to have a Scream come out and kind of set this, right the sails, so to speak. So, well, this is the focus. Maybe we can move on. And in a way, I think From Dusk Till Dawn, I think it's important that we have all these different like diets of movies. So if you're a Tarantino buff, I think it's important to watch this movie. But when it becomes a vampire movie, it kind of opens your eyes to, well, what's this like? I know what Tarantino's aping here. But with vampire, are there other vampire movies like this that I could watch? Are there other, the guy that plays Sex Machine, he's a makeup artist. What are the movies by him? I don't know. That's a way, some people can turn themselves off to it and then not have any association with horror, or they can use that as a springboard to experience other things. I think, I don't know. It's kind of like you need to experience like working in a fast food restaurant to know what it's like in the real world. I think you need to sample at least every particular type of genre of horror so that you can like latch onto what you like. It's not so much about kicking what you don't like to the curb. It's about finding what you like within that genre. I don't know. Am I making sense?
No, it definitely makes sense, because horror is a very wide genre. I mean, you have slow burn, atmospheric type stuff, and then you just have the hack and slash type stuff. And there's so much in between.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's so many horror movies that I watch for different reasons. And depending on what mood I'm in, it's like, do I want to see a bunch of people get their heads chopped off? Okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna go to this section of the shelf. Do I want to? Is it kind of stormy outside? So I want something that's very atmospheric and mysterious and creepy. Then I'm gonna go get something off this shelf. So horror, I think, has a lot to offer to anybody, because there's a lot of stuff that doesn't have any gore in it at all.
Yeah.
Or psychological horror. I mean, there's so many options out there.
Something for everybody, right?
Oh yeah.
John, any last thoughts on horror? or anything like that?
I think that's what I prefer, is the psychological side of things. I would go with that route as far as, my preference for horror films.
Right. Mine's a little wider. It's like, as long as you engage my brain, I don't care what it is.
The worst thing a movie can do, and
Yeah.
really the only time I call something a legitimately bad movie, the worst thing a movie can do is bore me. Just do anything else and I'll look at it and appreciate it for what it is. But if you bore me, nah.
And that's what happens with me with this movie. Like, I'm excited. I'm excited. The very first hour, I'm great. I'm on board, and then I get bored. Dying vampires. I've had enough of it.
Well, that ties in. Yeah, that makes. Well, the other thing too, and we're going off on tangents here, Lindsay, but like being a horror fiction on, like, say you like 2 out of 10 slasher movies, people are going to look at that and say, "Oh, she likes slasher movies." Like, it's not just that; it has to be good on some level. So I don't know. Were there any last? The only last point I want to make, I thought that part was really funny with Williamson, how he's all of a sudden he's doing a Vietnam speech, literally to the point where he's like swiping, and it shows like Clooney and Keitel and Lewis just like staring at him, just waiting, while Savini's like turning into. I thought that was really funny. I was like, this is so silly and funny. I don't know. I just thought that. Were there any, Lindsay? Was there any like other point of the movie you wanted to kind of bring up or kind of reminisce about before we?
Let me think. There's you could talk about this movie for hours and stuff. One thing another genre of horror that I really love is desert horror. And desert psychological horror, slasher horror. I love it all, just because I think it's such an interesting setting for a horror movie, and we don't get it a lot. I mean, you got like The Hitcher and Joyride and oh God, I can never remember the name of this one movie. It's got the kid from A Christmas Story in it. Death Valley. Valley, great horror movie. And so I've just always loved horror movies because I like that setting for horror. Because I mean, you've got like The Thing, where there's the isolation of they're buried in the snow in Antarctica, but here there's the isolation of the desert, and I love that separation from a bunch of buildings and cities and people. It isolates everything.
It adds an extra layer to the tension, right?
Yes.
So yeah, very good point. Johnny, was there any particular?
Sure, yeah, just the opening sequence. The opening scene is my favorite part of the movie. I could watch that opening scene over and over again. I think it's so well done. And I gotta say, man, John Hawkes is awesome as Pete Bottoms, that store clerk. He's so good, because once you know that he's keeping that secret, that they're in the store with the girls held hostage, right? A whole new performance on his level, and it's awesome because you actually sort of see it. And you go, wow, he really is playing both sides there. And then also, what's the guy's name? The Ranger, Michael Parks.
Yeah.
Earl. Yeah,
he's great too. Like, he is so good as that Texas Ranger. I think isn't he in Kill Bill at some point? I think it's a small part of Kill Bill too. But just phenomenal performances by both those characters, those actors. And I love watching that opening scene. I could watch it over and over again.
It is great. Yeah.
Again, something about Tarantino being able to build characters like that and make an impression, even though they get shot in the head like 30 seconds later. It's just, it's one of those things that only Tarantino can do, and other people try and they're not. Again, don't be Tarantino. Like, do your own thing, and that's why Tarantino's like, he's so forefront of this first half, and then the Rodriguez thing is so forefront. It's his movie at the end. Whether you feel like they mesh or not, I think that it's definitely both sides of that. Lindsay, for the last word, I mean, is this usually when we do these episodes, we talk about, is this worth remembering? Is this worth the remake? But I think with all these movies that we're picking, we all appreciate these movies. We all like these movies. But was there anything else that you wanted to add, why this movie should be remembered, or why it's memorable today? Any other thoughts you had?
I think it's very memorable because, the Rodriguez Tarantino connection, of course. But just that this movie really is a gateway, and I think it was for a lot of people, was a gateway into other genres and all these, genre actors and FX people that were involved with it. I think this was a branch off for a lot of people to discover some really, really cool stuff. And so I give that a lot of credit.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, again, thank you so much for bringing this to us. We could look, I think Pulp Fiction, we started with that, and that's a good movie to start because we think Pulp Fiction is probably the defining movie of the entire decade. Definitely is a.
Oh yeah, I think that's a lot of people's first Tarantino movie.
Yeah, where it kind of hits and makes that impression on you. But other than taking the really obvious ones, I like that we're able to take a movie like this and we're able to talk about horror and what horror means, as opposed to just talking about the movie. And so, again, you being the expert at we love that you're able to bring that. And that's another reason why when you mentioned From Dusk Till Dawn, I was like, that's perfect. Like, let's talk about that. So we appreciate you. Again, I was telling Jonny before we recorded, like, I'm nervous. like Lindsay's all like,
I was nervous too. I'm always nervous.
Well, that helps. Again, it's more a question of like I said, we're not afraid of you or anything. It's just
good.
You've got such strong opinions. Like, you're so whip smart. It's like, oh my gosh, I hope that I can keep up. You know what I mean? Like,
this has been great. This has been great.
Well, good. And again, we appreciate it. Again, I'm going to bring up, when everybody check out your videos. They're not just informative. Like, you want, a bit of that film history. You want, like we talked about, how you like these movies, even though they're not necessarily the best movies. Like, that's an angle, but you're also funny, and you also attack these in a way that makes it more personable. And again, it was funny watching your best of 80s movies and realizing that we actually covered on this podcast. We covered a lot of the movies. We've covered the Beastmaster, the Neverending Story, The Goonies, Back to the Future, Better Off Dead, Little Shop of Horrors, Stand By Me, Princess Bride, Willow, Batman, UHF. We've covered so many of these movies that you like and adore. And so I was like, that's great. Like, we have these things in common.
Oh, yes.
But again, the other thing too, thank you for that, what you did for me earlier this year and how that I was able to find.
Reach out to me anytime.
Yeah, I appreciate the hell out of you for that. So if you wanted to let everybody know, how do we get a hold of you and what like videos you recommend, like how do people get to know the Lindsay Washburn? How would they do that?
Follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm most active, I would say, on social media. And then I have my YouTube channel, and I'm on Instagram as well. And my YouTube channel is just my name, Lindsay Washburn, and Twitter and Instagram are the Lindsay Washburn, because Lindsay Washburn was already taken on those sites. But tweet at me. I mean, I'll answer whatever, ask me what movie you should watch or what I'm watching that weekend. I usually share what I'm watching that weekend, or if I'm going to see something in the theater. So yeah, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then just let me ask, how did your Maxine audition go?
It was so much fun. I had a little too much fun as Pearl in the old lady makeup and ratty hair and the gross teeth. But a friend of mine, Jake Rains, he shot it and edited it, and he sent it to me, but I haven't looked at it yet. So I'll probably get that posted tomorrow. Okay.
Well, we all look forward to you being the star of the next T West movie. Definitely find you there. Again, Lindsay, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence. I've loved this conversation. I love that, I'm meeting a lot of people through binge movies.
Oh yes, definitely.
But there's just a lot of like-minded people. I'm going to say this all the time. It's like Twitter's a cesspool, but you're one of the people that have literally thrown me a life raft. You've helped me out, and it's just great being able to talk to like-minded movie fans. And again, just the humor and everything you bring to your videos, we appreciate you for that. Everybody check Lindsay out. We love her to death and hope that you get to that point too. So Lindsay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. You're too kind.
You're welcome. Okay. Thank you.
Everybody be cool. You be cool.
And welcome back again. We want to thank Miss Lindsay Washburn. Lindsay Washburn, we'll just call it that. A great conversation with her. She's, like we talked about, she's very smart. She's very clever and quick with the retorts and quick with the thoughts. And so just being able to talk with her and, bring horror into the conversation. I don't think we've ever had a good horror conversation. And especially with our backgrounds, like VHS stuff and, kind of dipping our toes into those things. So again, great conversation. We hope to have her back on soon. If anybody hasn't, please go ahead and check out her YouTube channel. It's got a lot of great stuff there. So for our outro topic, we wanted to, do something a a little bit different. Like we're talking about maybe doing top 3 Rodriguez movies, maybe top 3 or bottom 3 special effects movies for the 90s, stuff like that. And then I think it would be more fun. Since you didn't like the second half of the vampires, and I got a kick out of the vampire stuff, even though I didn't like it as much as the first half, I thought it'd be fun for you to do your top 3 like road or hostage thrillers of the 90s, and I'll do my top 3 like vampire movies of the 90s. We'll just have a nice mix there. So since obviously we start with the hostage thriller, the road, the traveling through. What let's do 3, 2, 1. So what was your third hostage thriller?
I'm going to go with kind of a more obscure movie with this one. I think I'm going to pick California with a K, which is David Duchovny and Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis. She's also. So that's why I picked that one. Plus, I think it's a really fun movie, and it kind of has the whole, they're on the road, they're taken hostage by a serial killer, and it's a fun performance by Brad Pitt too. It's one of his not most well-known roles, but if you haven't seen it, check it out. He does a really good job in this one.
Okay. So my number 3, looking at the list of vampire movies in the 90s, there weren't a lot of great ones. I don't really count From Dusk Till Dawn as a vampire movie because, again, it's only half. So my third is a movie that I don't particularly like a lot, but it's one that I appreciate, especially the value of it and what it did, especially for comic book movies. After Batman and Robin came out in 97, comic book movies are basically dead. So Stephen Norrington's Blade with Wesley Snipes. Again, my problem, it's very stylish. I think it's Wesley Snipes' best role. It's got Donald Logue in a fun performance. Chris Christopherson's in there. So it's got a lot of fun parts. And there's obviously that first opening sequence with the dance rave, and it's like the bloodbath or the blood rave or whatever, where Blade comes in and kills all those vampires. So again, it's fun, but about halfway through, or maybe 45 minutes in, they capture Blade and they keep him captive for like another 45 minutes, and they keep going in and taunting him, and so it gets very repetitive until the very end where he breaks out and kills everybody, obviously. But so even though I don't like that stuff, Blade before X-Men, before Spider-Man, it let us know after Batman and Robin that comic book movies were cool and they could be stylish. They didn't have to be campy. They didn't have to be silly. They could be dark. They could be violent. Like, again, those good, gore porn or whatever movies. And there's a lot of that in there. So even though I don't love Blade, I do appreciate it for what it stood for. So that's my number 3.
Okay. Good one. Okay, I'm going to pick for number 2, Breakdown, starring Kurt Russell.
Oh, yeah.
And JT Walsh.
Oh, my gosh.
This is a fun movie. I saw it on DVD. I just come back from Kentucky, and I hadn't seen movies in a while. And so I popped this one in, and I didn't know what I was getting into. And it was a lot of fun. It took me for a ride. And the feeling that, you get when you lose a child or you lose someone or you can't find someone, that panic feeling, I could sense that Kurt Russell had that, and he kept that the whole movie, and getting revenge on JT Walsh and all that. It was just a fun movie, and it's just a good ride if you want to go for a ride. This is a good one for it.
Right. Yeah, that's a tense ride. I like to call that a master class in building and releasing tension, because when he meets he's in the part where they finally out of the bank, and the guy that he's with realizes that the money's fake anyway. So all that stuff, and he's able to take things back in his own hands. And from then on, it's like satisfying because he's getting the comeuppance and all these bad guys and all that stuff. Again, it seems like I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Vanishing from 1988.
The one Buried Alive, is that the one you're talking about?
Kind of, but it's more about the guy's girlfriend disappears. It's the George Sluizer, I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm messing that up, Sluizer movie. But again, it's about obsession and stuff like that. And so this is kind of like the crowd-pleasing version of that story. But again, very tense. And I remember seeing that in the theater and just, a white knuckler, because you're gripping the armchairs or whatever. So yeah, great pick. So for my number 2, we talked about it before. We talked about it during our Forrest Gump episode with the bad accents. Even though it's got a bad Keanu Reeves performance in it, I'm going to pick Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Okay.
As my number 2. I just think it's a very, very stylish. It's more faithful to the Bram Stoker novel. Francis Ford Coppola, like I said, very stylish. Instead of going with so again, it's got like Gary Oldman, obviously one of my favorite actors. It's got Anthony Hopkins, really over the top performance, that kind of thing. but instead of going with the typical like CGI stuff, what's impressive about the movie is the way Coppola relies on old filmmaking techniques, like the back projection, the multiple exposures, forced perspectives, miniatures, things like that, all the matting techniques, matte paintings. So all this stuff is in camera, and he had made his son like Roman Coppola. He's the one that handled the special effects, but very, very stylish. I don't know if I'd call it scary. It's more romantic. You know, Dracula, we talked about this before, is not exactly something that scares me. So the Gary Oldman performance, he sinks his teeth into, you know, there's the modern version, there's the old Dracula that he plays, there's the, you know, the wolf monster or whatever. He gets to play all these parts, and he really gets a chance to shine. But it's the stylishness of that movie that I really love, and that really sticks out. So it's, you know, you watch it today, it feels very modern. It feels very crisp and new, even though it's very old fashioned. So what are your thoughts on Bram Stoker's Dracula?
I mean, yeah, you can't go wrong with Gary Oldman as Dracula. I mean, you showed it to me for the first time, and other than Keanu Reeves' bad accent, I like that movie. It's a fun movie to watch.
Yeah, you know what I mean though about it not being scary. Like it doesn't.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it scary either. Yeah,
yeah, it's more erotic or anything, or it's more like a love story, so to speak. But again, sumptuous movie to look at. So yeah, Bram Stoker's Dracula is my number 2. What was your number 1 thriller?
Number 1, I'm gonna go with Perfect World, Kevin Costner, Clint Eastwood movie.
Oh yeah.
This one, it always brings a tear to my eye at the end, because they form that bond with the young boy that he takes with him on this journey. And when his character, you know, finally dies, I think he dies, right? Does he die?
Yeah. Spoilers. Yeah, he dies. He gets shot.
Okay. Yeah, he does die. But I remember just like being like kind of choked up during that moment. And it's just a overall nice movie to look at. It just looks pretty. I like the way it looks, and I like the characters, and I like to, you know, just like I say, you're going for a ride again on this one. And so I like movies to take you on a journey. So that's why I like it.
Yeah, I think it's a great follow-up after Unforgiven, which is my all-time favorite Western and all-time favorite Eastwood movie. Just it's laid back. It's not like an action film, but it's fascinating. You know, you have the Kevin Costner character. He's great in it. Like he gets to play layers.
It's one of his best roles. Yeah, other than
absolutely.
That range and yeah, he's really good in this.
So, but he's a again, like we talked about with Clooney, he's a bastard. Right. And so even though we side with him, there's the part where the little boys, or no, they go to visit that black family, and the dad is like beating him, and something turns on in him, and he becomes violent, and just something's triggered in him. And so it's very threatening all of a sudden. So yeah, it takes you all over the place. So even though it's a road movie, it's still very like, you know, I don't want to say leisurely, but it does take its time.
It is kind of subdued, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But again, very impactful for all those strong scenes in there. So again, not a lot of strong vampire movies, but the strongest vampire movie, I think, of the 90s, it was Guillermo del Toro's first movie, Cronos, from 1993. Have you seen that one?
I think I want to say yes, but it's been a long time if I have. I don't know much.
He's obviously made better movies since then. He's become a better filmmaker. Obviously, Shape of Water winning Best Picture or whatever. But Cronos has all his staples. It's got like the makeup. It's got the sumptuous design. It's got like the gross out parts. It's got the, you know, the little girl, kind of like Pan's Labyrinth, this little girl in there that kind of helps out. But it's, you know, about the old guy that finds this like talisman or some kind of like object in this statue. And turns out there's a giant bug in it that turns him into a vampire, and he has to start feeding, to the point where he goes to a party and sees like a guy's nose bleeding, so he follows him in there and licks the blood off the floor. So, and it, you know, it's got Ron Perlman in it, so that's obviously a big Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah. Oh boy.
But what's great about it, it's this short little tight horror story with, like I said, with all these gross out parts, but it's very stylish. It's very moody. When I really like when a horror movie is able to build a mood, a feeling of dread, and I think this movie does that. And then even at the end, it's sad. You know, there's this, you like this guy, there's obviously all this stuff that you're going through, and the daughter has to, not the granddaughter has to see him go through all this. So yeah, if anybody hasn't seen Cronos, check that out. It's a kick, man. Like I said, it's a little bit of everything. So, all right. So what were your top 3 road / hostage to the movies of the 90s?
I picked a Perfect World, and I picked number 2 was Breakdown, and number 3 was California with the K.
Okay. All right, with a K. It's important distinction. And then for my number 1 vampire movie, I picked Cronos from 1993. Number 2, I picked Bram Stoker's Dracula, again directed by the great Francis Ford Coppola, 1982. And my number 3, even though, again, I'm going to say this again, it's not one of my favorite movies. Blade did a great job of bringing the comic book movie back to the fore And in a way, we have Blade to blame for our current like overrun of superhero movies and comic book stuff. So yeah, but when a comic book movie hits, when there's style to it, when Guillermo del Toro, speaking of him, comes back and does Blade 2, when Del Toro does Hellboy, stuff like that, it's very, very stylish. You got Nolan, obviously, Raimi doing comic book movies. So it opens the door too for these, Ryan Coogler, obviously, James Gunn. It opens the door for all these great filmmakers to come in and make their stamp. So again, to blame or to appreciate Blade, that's definitely something there. So, okay, so that'll do it for our vampire / tense road movie thriller genre mashup. We'll leave that behind us. And then for our next movie, it's going to be your choice. Johnny, what is going to be our next movie for the 90s Palooza?
I kind of want to lighten this up a little bit. I kind of want to do something that, has some comedy to it, and some music as well. So I picked That Thing You Do. By Tom Hanks. So It should be fun.
All right. So we saw that in California, right? In a theater.
Studios, I believe, is where we saw it.
Okay, we'll chat about that. Have you seen the extended edition of that?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe.
Okay, so if you could do me a favor, I know that both of us like That Thing You Do quite a bit and probably have it memorized. So if you watch it again, try to find that extended version. It's about half an hour to 45 minutes longer. 45 minutes longer than the original cut. So yeah, watch that, see what you think, see if it makes a difference, and then we'll chat about that as well as the regular movie. Sound good?
Yeah, well, sounds good.
Okay, so That Thing You Do, written, directed by the great Tom Hanks. Man, we're coming back to Tom Hanks again. It's just going to be circles. Like, I think all these people they're so prominent that there's no way around it. Like, we're going to run into these guys again and again because they're the movies that we fell in love with, and they kind of spearheaded a lot of these. So yeah, so let's talk about that next time. Awesome choice. But until then, for NostalgiaCast, I'm Darin Lumberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And we'll catch you next time on NostalgiaCast. You didn't take my trick. Like I told you my trick last time. It's like you stop and then you wait for the other guy to finish and then you go. All right, we'll try that again next time. All right.
Okay.